Hi, it's Jen from Shabby Fabrics with an awesome project for you today. This is all about the PlumEasy Patterns point of view kaleidoscope, and we have a new tool that makes putting these together easier than ever before. So if you have not seen our previous videos about the point of view table topper, let me just get you up to speed. Welcome, subscribe, do that right now, by the way, and hit the bell. That way, as new videos come out, you're the first to see that. And you can tell all your friends about it as well. We love having a bigger quilting community. These videos are free, will always be free, by the way. I'm seeing some of our other people in the industry charging for this content. Forget that. We do these videos, they're expensive to produce, but we are invested in our quilting community worldwide to bring beautiful content, education, and fun so that we can be crafting and creating more beautiful projects and sharing our love of quilting with people that maybe haven't found us yet. So Point of View Table Topper was actually designed by Deborah Miller of PlumEasy Patterns, and I love that she did this because often table runners, the long rectangle, which are great for a rectangular table, but don't work at all on a round table. I love that she came up with this, and it's a good size. It's kind of like the Fold and Star hot pad, but much larger, right? And it serves a different purpose. I love just the Prairie Points, the center, and how this all comes together. It's so much fun to make. Well, in the process of making point of view table toppers, and that's another video you can watch, of course, it all starts with a center motif, and sometimes that can be actually hard to find. It's either too small or too big, but not just right, as they say. So I had an idea actually last year about, okay, if I can't find the perfect fabric, but maybe I'm inspired by a fabric collection, is there something that I could do to create my center motif that will go down and we still adorn the perimeter with Prairie Points? And that's when the Point of View Kaleidoscope was born. And we did that video and we showed you how to make that. And we talked about the Creative Grid 45-degree ruler. It's actually a tool, and that worked really well. However, as we were working with the Up On The Housetop collection by Riley Blake, which I think is adorable for holiday of 2024, we were really getting in there and really doing a lot of what's called fussy cutting. And we thought, you know, it'd be awesome if we could have a template that all we had to do was put on our position and simply trace around and cut around. How fun that would be. Versus a ruler that's bigger than it needs to be, right? We're only looking for about 4 inches tall. Now, I'm not tracing, I'm not cutting around this whole perimeter, which makes using the other ruler difficult. Does it work? Yes. Can you do it? Yes. And you can see in the very first video when I actually did the Christmas night one, which is the one on the cover of the pattern here, I did use that tool. But as we have learned, hey, you know what? It'd be nice. It'd be awesome actually to have a tool that's the perfect size, shows us where our 1/4 inch seam is, and shows us actually where the Prairie Points are going to hit. That is what we want to be covering with you today. And you can see that making point of view is even easier, the kaleidoscope version, with this tool. So the first thing that you're going to want to do is grab yourself a snack and a drink. This is a longer video, and why is that? It is to make sure that if you have never even done something like this, that you can be successful. That's our goal here, every time we produce a video. So grab yourself a snack, a drink, and take a break when you need to. And know we'll be trying to break this up in segments and kind of chapters, so that if you need to just jump to a section, we'll have that broken out for you. But we're going to take you through each and every step of this so that you can, of course, be able to be successful either buying the pattern, using your own fabric, and of course, be sure to use the tool as well, or grabbing the kit. We don't care however you do that. We just want you to be successful. And we also know that once you have used the template that's inside your pattern, and that is, by the way, sewn into the project, you're going to want to do this again and again. They make amazing gifts. And that's why we do have the 3-pack refill, because this, again, is sewn into the project, and it washes up lovely, by the way. If you spill something on that, it gets dirty, don't worry about that. Throw that right in the washer and dryer, give it a good press, and you're ready to go again. So let's just start unpacking. How do we approach a project like this? We know we're gonna have to find 8 repeats, because let's look at that, right? These are 45-degree slices, wedges. We have 8 in total. So whatever fabric you're going to be wanting to use, whether it's the one in your kit or something from home, you need to have 8 motifs. So in this particular instance, let's just open up our fabric, take a look. We have some tools we can recommend if you want to get an idea of what those 8 wedges would look like. And that is the Magic Mirror by Marty Michelle, a lovely lady, a friend of mine whom I've known for so long. She's just ingenious. And the Magic Mirror is not a new notion. It's been out forever. So if you've ever made a kaleidoscope block, that's what this is, by the way, just a kaleidoscope block. It's nice to have a magic mirror because it helps you audition. What is this thing going to look like if I perhaps fussy cut the church? What's that going to look like? Or perhaps it's Santa coming out, or actually getting ready to go down the chimney, or the reindeer. You get the idea. So I'm going to go ahead and set the magic mirror up. Marty has also created an angle holder, because when you don't use the angle holder, you're guessing where that 45 is. There's no way to really stabilize that, right? It just kind of keeps opening. And I love that Marty listens to requests. People said, is there something that would hold that angle at 45 or 60 or even 90, depending on the project they're doing? And she created that. This has these very deep grooves that works in combination with the magic mirror. And because we have 8 wedges to cut, 8 times 45 is 360 degrees, which is what we're going to be needing. So I'll be setting this onto our magic mirror, locking that in so that we're right at our 45. So you can see as I move this, remember when we were kids and we used to play with those kaleidoscopes? Is this the coolest thing ever? Now keep in mind a couple things when you're looking in the mirror. Let's focus on, let's say that's Santa. Remember that this is the wedge, but a 1/4 inch is going to be taken up along this entire wedge when we sew things together. So if you don't want to have Santa's hat cut off, you need to push that higher to try to visually clear the 1/4 inch on either side. So keep that in mind whenever you're using the mirror, okay? So as I move around, if I liked the reindeer, for example, that's a pretty good sized reindeer. I'd have to push pretty high up to be able to get most of the reindeer. Now, I mentioned this template. This is the template that we're going to be talking about today. Previously, we spoke about the Creative Grid 45-degree tool, which of course you're not going to be cutting around the whole perimeter. It does a great job of the 45, but obviously it's much bigger than it needs to be. Whereas this is the template you'll be cutting around the entire time. Let's slip this in here. The white lines that are solid are telling you that is your seam allowance. So that's another thing you can do in combination with the mirror to not have to guesstimate where the 1/4 inch will hit. This is absolutely where it will hit. And you can see it's almost kind of cutting off the nose of that reindeer there. I don't think that one's going to work for us. So let's move over. Let's say that we want to check out Santa. Let's put our tool in there and say, you know what? I don't want to cut off his hat. I'm going to move that a little bit. And you can now know that sewn into this project, you are going to see that sight picture of everything that's inside that solid line right there. That plus sign is helping you very specifically line up even more definitively, because you can see, all right, let's say that I want to make sure that the left side of that plus sign is right on top of Santa's hat. You can see if that plus sign wasn't there, you could be slightly off and not maybe notice it. slightly above that. Now, there is no other function than that plus sign, than just additional line up assistance. What about these lines right here? What is that telling you? Okay, that is telling you that the beautiful prairie points that we are going to make, this is where they're going to hit. That is going to be covered up, that part of the chimney. So this is the beauty of this tool. This line is to understand where the prairie points are going to hit. So if there's something very important here that you want to see, you need to move, because that prairie point is going to cover that up. You get the idea. This is why we created and invented this template. This template is expressly made for being able to do the point of view kaleidoscope unit that is the core and the center of this entire project. Now that we've determined where we want to cut, now what? So with our template, we are going to find that perfect spot. We know we can use the magic mirror if we want to, not a mandatory thing, if you have a good ability to kind of visualize what that'll look like. But we need to say, all right, I know I need to have 8 of these things. I recommend you find all 8 and actually trace around this first to make sure that's your spot before we start cutting. So previously, when we did the point of view kaleidoscope, we cut these nice long 4-inch strips, and we were just doing a lot of cutting in that strip. But those motifs, the repeat was very close together, not spread out like this. This is a much larger piece of fabric, but I couldn't resist Santa. I mean, it's Christmas, right? So I'm going to grab my temporary marking tool. One thing I want to point out to you is that this template is very slippery. It's acrylic. The Gypsy quilter makes some great notions, and one of my favorites is the grip dots. There may be other tools you have at home besides this template that just tend to slip away from you and resulting in a miscut. This is the template without the grips on there. This is the template where we just put 3 of those. And now it's literally moving the fabric with it with minimal pressure. This is very much something I recommend that you do, because we want perfect cuts. We want precise cuts with no slippage. Now, looking at the project, if we were going to mimic this Santa, notice kind of the pom-pom of his hat is consistently hitting in the same spot. All right, well, let's just take a look at that with this kind of in our view as well. And notice we're seeing just a little bit of the red. I'm just showing you the lineup if you were going to mimic what we did. Again, do what you love. Feel confident about what you're doing, your motif. Make sure it's going to fit in your project. And we would love to see if you do something different. That's awesome. So as I look at this, I definitely want to make sure his pom-pom is in there. And I want to make sure that beautiful star is in there. So while I could drop this down, I'm going to be cutting off part of my star. So let's go ahead and bring that up. And I really kind of like running parallel with my stripe right there. I feel like that's a nice spot. My star is mostly in the middle, slightly offside. And look at this plus sign. It's going right across where the kind of the cuff of Santa's hat is and his hat itself. That's a great position to be in, because it's something I can find again and again and again in the next place. So once we have this, go ahead. Even if you want to take a photo of that, you could certainly do that. I'm going to draw this. I'm going to draw it. Now, if you feel confident going, okay, I see 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. And you feel confident that you have the 8, go ahead and cut it. You just don't want to make a cut without being sure you can get 8 of that motif out of your fabric. Once you feel very confident about what you've accomplished here, I love my spinning mat, but it's not going to work right now. So what we've in essence done is we've extracted that out. Now, as you can imagine, I want to go over and very carefully cut in the exact location. This is going to take time, but I promise it's worth it. It's totally worth it. So I'm going to go extract out 7 more of those, and then we're going to lay them out, and then we're going to begin sewing them together. Now, here's something that's really going to be fun, and I'll show you what this is going to look like. It's going to look like Swiss cheese. And you're thinking, wow, that's going to be a lot of waste. No, it's actually called opportunity. And we will be filming some additional projects for you with the leftover fabric. How fun is that? You will now have a beautiful table topper and at least a couple coordinating projects. So this is fun to be able to extract that out. That's why I was very careful to really remove that without disturbing the things nearby, so that we do have the opportunity to do some additional projects. So I'll go ahead and I'm just going to keep cutting these out. And when I come back, the sewing machine will be on set. We're going to lay everything out and we'll get busy getting our centers sewn together, quilted, and we'll move on to making our Prairie Points after that. So I have my 8 motifs cut out around the template, and you can see I have some beautiful Swiss cheese here. There's a lot of fabric left over. And again, if you haven't already subscribed, do that now, because this is going to be a lot of fun. We'll be doing some coordinating projects, and you're going to see that this is not wasted, not at all. It sparks our creativity, and I can see a lot of things that I know are already in the works, and maybe we might even come up with some more. Okay, but now, what are we going to do with these? Let's lay them out, see how they look, make sure there weren't any mistakes, because if there were, you have enough fabric to go back and cut a different part of that and get 8 motifs. That's the lovely part about having so much fabric to choose from. So you want to lay everything out, give it a good look. Is it what you were expecting? And I think that looks pretty cool. So we will sew these together in pairs. Now, what matters here is the center. So when I place the 2 sides, right side together, I'm most definitely going to start sewing center out. That's what matters the most. Because remember, this perimeter out here, it's all underneath here. You're not even going to see that. So we don't really care if the ends don't match perfectly, but we really need that center to come in nice and strong. So we can just pin those together in groups of 2 and go start sewing. Why are we not just sewing 2 and adding 1 more and 1 more and 1 more? We have learned that when you do that, things tend to get a little bit wonky. It's definitely better to sew in groups of 2, then come back and sew 2 groups of 2 together to make 4, and then sew everything together. So that's just something that has been taught to me from the early stages of when I learned how to quilt, and I've kept that habit and it has served me well. So I'll get everything pinned so that when we go to the sewing machine, we're just making a very efficient trip. No need to just sew 2 at a time. So while I am, of course, trying to line up the top here, I'm also looking at this line, because you can imagine if this is off, it will be noticeable. So I am definitely looking at that point as well and doing just a little bit of make it work, as we say. A little pushing and pulling. Obviously, we all try to trace around that template, cut around that template as precise as can be. Even with the grips, it can sometimes be slightly different. That's why we're just trying to compensate and make sure our alignment looks really nice. All right. Now, you could certainly sew these together with the green thread that is in our thread set. And what you might be saying, why is there a thread set when you're doing piecing? And the thread set is really for coming back and doing the top stitching of the Prairie Points later on. because you can see it as what gives it that beautiful embossed look. And the monopoly thread, whether it's the clear or the smoke, is what will actually be used to stitch in this valley. So you can certainly load this now to do the piecing. I just have a neutral in my machine because that's what we historically piece with. But the point is to sew a nice accurate 1/4 inch seam allowance. I'm going to get my iron heating up to full hot right now. And I have my seam guide to assist me to keep that 1/4 inch as true as it can be. I also have, this is called the Cluck Cluck Sew Diagonal Seam Tape. One of the things I really like about it is notice how I can get lined up, definitively lined up, and then it's entering into the seam guide, which is also like this barrier. I just like, rather than coming in at a funky angle, which is gonna potentially cause problems, I like lining up good and early and trying to stay lined up the whole time. So we'll be pressing our seams open here to distribute that bulk nice and even. Okay, let's get these pressing open and get that center part put together. Excited to show you how this comes together. Now, sometimes when I have a hard time opening a seam like that, some people love to use this over the top because it just tends to open that up. I don't know actually why that is. It just is. And then if you want this to be just having some weight on it, there's also the wood part. So this is a notion from the Gypsy Quilter. I love it's got the pressing bar over the top. It helps just open up a seam that's kind of resistant as that one was. And then if you want a block to be so flat and you just need weight on it for a while, this is kind of that clapper. So what a great combination of the two. And this is coming out beautifully. So I'll go ahead and keep pressing and opening and pressing and opening. And then when I come back, let's lay them back out on the table, make sure everything's looking good, because if it's off, I'm seam ripping. That's gonna happen. And if it is, I'll do that so you can see that. But you know, I seam rip just like the rest of you, maybe even more frequently. All right, so I'm laying everything out. I see everything looks pretty good. So now I am going to place these together, and I am very much looking at this place, right? We've got bias here. We cut this on the bias. What do we know about bias? Bias is stretchy. That's good. That way, if I need to push or pull just a little bit to make things work, we can do it. Notice my bottoms aren't exactly the same. I don't care. Doesn't matter. What matters is here and out. Because remember, notice we don't see any wording around here. It's buried. It's underneath there. But this line and this line should match right there and there. And of course, we want things to come together at the top. All right, this half, again, point. Let's just pin that. And point right there. Okay, let's go sew. So once again, same story. Seams are being pressed open. Warm seams are more malleable, pliable. And I didn't know that for probably about the first 2 decades of me quilting until I saw more and more people doing that. I'm thinking, there must be a reason for that. And that is why is they're just a little more likely to comply with what you would like that seam to do. And this, at this point, I want that to open. And I very much want this quilt block to be really flat. There's a lot of things coming together in the middle here. And the flatter that is, the more likely the points are going to come together. And this is why I'm using the pressing bar in conjunction with the clapper. Is this essential to do that? No, it is not. But if you have a need for that for other projects, sure, pick it up. It's a great notion to have, but it's certainly not a deal breaker. There are other things I would say are a higher priority. Obviously the template. All right, let's press this last one open and we'll lay it out again. Then all we have is one more seam. And once our center's together, we're going to be adding some batting. So while I'm pressing this open, you can add fusible fleece in there if you wanted, but we're going to use 2 pieces of batting. They need to be cut to 12 inches by 12 inches. So grab whatever that is. I've just got, I think, some heat and bond or maybe some fusible fleece, whatever that is that you have handy. So I'm going to go ahead and let that get good and flat. And I'm going to get my pieces ready to go for my 2 layers of the batting. We're going to lay that out and we're going to do one more seam to put that all together. And then we'll be off to quilting that, which is really fun. And our quilting we did was super simple. We actually just stitched right in those wedges. But you could do anything you want. You could stitch around certain motifs. All right, now that we have that, now we're going to bring everything together. And you can see how I am looking from the top, lining up those open seams, starting there and pinning. I want to hit that gold point on that other piece, even if I have to pull just a little bit. I want to get that point down there. So you're looking for those places to line up. Lots of pins, like I'm going to give it just a little bit of a pull of what's in the back there. Put a pin here so things aren't moving. Notice I'm pinning from this side, not here. Why? Because I can leave my pins in while I'm sewing. I used to pin out here and I never sew over pins. So of course, if the pin's here, I had to stop well before that and pull my pin out. Why put the pin in if you're going to pull it out before you need it? That is why I pin from this side and not on the other side, which is how I was actually taught. So that's something that I've changed over the years. All right, let's go sew our final seam. Make sure nothing rolled back. Before we even press anything, let's look. Let's make sure we're happy and we don't need a seam rip, okay? And I am very happy with that. I feel like we've got the look we're looking for. Let's open that up. A lot of bulk right there in the middle. I can feel that. That's a big confluence of seams. That's another thing I love about the Gypsy Quilter pressing bar. Look how long this is. I have seen pressing bars that have been shorter. And usually a product is either a pressing bar or a clapper, but not often a combination. So I love that it does both jobs. I'm absolutely going to put that clapper on there. Okay, we're going to let that cool for just a bit, get that nice and flat. So we're going to bring out our fusible fleece or batting. Does not matter what you're going to use, does not matter. And let's just take a look at that. Basically what we're going to be doing is we're going to be placing this on here, and I'm going to take advantage. I feel that I have fusible fleece. I can feel it. This is sticky side. This is the glue side up, and this is the glue side up. What's going to happen here when I place this on top of that and I iron this down is this is going to be glued to this, and this is going to be glued to that. Lovely. I don't need pins to hold this all together now while I'm quilting. Now, because I don't want to take a chance of potentially getting any of the fusible fleece on the bottom of my iron, I'm going to find a applique sheet or some other thing to protect my iron, or I just have to be very careful that as I approach the edges that I am not letting my iron make contact, because it can make quite a mess. I've absolutely done that before. I've got some parchment paper. Let me just put that over there. That definitely will not stick to a fusible fleece. You don't have to be shy about steaming. Okay, the point is contact, right? And we can certainly use our parchment paper again, which we will when we start gluing everything down. Now that we have everything secured, this is when we're going to use our coordinating thread and come in. We again just went ahead and stitched in our valleys here. And then to accent that, we stitched around the center. So I'll go ahead and set my machine up to get that quilting done. Okay, so I've got this quilted, and now that I have it quilted, I have some things I would do differently doing it a second time. Or if I had nothing but time, I would maybe seam rip that out. Let's look at what I'm talking about. I sew with the green thread that's in our thread set that primarily is in the kit to sew down this layer of Prairie Points. One of the things I actually like about the sample over what I just did is you really don't notice any thread in these valleys, but you notice this thread around the middle. As I'm looking at that in the gap of time from sewing to now, I believe this was sewn with the monopoly, probably in the smoke. Notice you don't really see the thread, but you see an embossment. You see these very defined wedges, which are lovely. And I can see now that this stitch in the middle, as I flip to the back, was done at the very, very end when the backing was on to add even further detail around the center. So that's just something that I wanted to share with you, that if you are going to grab the kit, you might want to think about doing the quilting this way, or if you have something extra special in mind and you want to be going around the Santa and maybe adding texture to his beard and just taking it to the nines, do whatever you want to do. But anyway, I feel like this is still lovely enough. Let's keep going. Now that we're here, we're going to grab a straight edge, and our goal here is to just trim off the excess batting. That is all we're doing right now, all the way around the project. Works great with a spinning mat. A little crowded for space today, so I don't have that one with me, but if I did, why not put that on a spinning mat? But not critical. Again, not critical. Now for the next step, we're going to be making a lot of Prairie Points. One of the things I want to encourage you to grab while I'm finishing this up is go ahead and grab some sizing. It really, the Prairie Points come out so nice and crisp and precise when they have some sizing in them. We definitely discovered that. I've made Prairie Points without it and Prairie Points with it, and it is notably better whenever I can add sizing to the fabric before I cut out my squares. One of the other things I've discovered is the more precise you cut your 5-inch squares, the more precise your Prairie Point will be. So in your kit, of course, you have lots of fabric here. And one of my favorite ways to cut a bunch of fabric all at the same time and precisely is always with a ruler that is the exact measurements. And that's the Perfect 5 by Creative Grid. Is this one of those rulers you have to get? Is this required? No. But does this make it more precise and faster to complete the project? Absolutely. And if you're going to be making a bunch of these, just grab this, and it works amazingly well, of course, with a spinning mat, where you can layer several strips of the fabric, folding back and forth, stacking up your fabric, right? You've got the strip of fabric, and let's just pretend this was the fabric. This isn't, this happens to be our backing, but let's just pretend that was our fabric. We could be putting this right on top of a spinning mat and cutting multiple layers at a time and perfectly cut to 5 inches. So I just wanted to mention that as well. I'm always going to tell you when a ruler or a tool is required and the others that are just recommended, and you can make a decision of whether they're right for you or not. Another tool, let's talk about making Prairie Points without a Prairie Pointer, which is my favorite way, but I've again done plenty of Prairie Points without one. So we need to get our iron good and hot. And the way that we'll be making our Prairie Points here is we just fold that in half and give a good press. Now, this is another job if you want to have the clapper kind of come into play again, where you can be doing the kind of groups of these, right? You get the iron on there, it gets good and hot, that whole idea. Let's just talk about a Prairie Point without the Prairie Pointer. We simply fold the flaps to the middle, trying to keep that even, and have a nice point without them overlapping. You do not want these flaps to overlap like that. It can't happen. We need them to be able to be open so that we can come back, and hopefully you can see that from above. We need them to be able to open up so that we can come back with our monopoly thread, our clear thread, to be able to stitch in this valley. If they're overlapped, we're never going to be able to do that. So this is very important that they meet perfectly. We also don't want them to be too open or you're going to see that thread. So that's why, again, trying to get just right. Takes just a little bit of practice and we can iron that. This is how to make a Prairie Point without the Prairie Pointer. You're just needing to be kind of intentional about those meeting, butting right up to each other without overlapping. And once they're there, again, we can bring our clapper just to sit on there to just really lock in those points. Very important. What's this business about this Prairie Pointer by Susan Cleveland? Awesome lady, amazing tool. I've seen all kinds of really cool projects with this because she can do something called lined Prairie Points, maybe a project for another day. But why I like it for this one and why Deborah Miller told me about this when I had a chance to ask her about it many years ago now, is she said she's never found a way to make more precise Prairie Points. So let's look at this tool. We would still fold our square in half just like I did, but notice how there's 1.5, 2, 3, all of these measurements. Remember how we cut our fabric to 5-inch squares? Notice how there's the 5 and how it's sitting just exactly where it should be, and how there's that vertical line. That's your line up. You're not guessing. You're simply bringing the points to that location, putting your iron on top, and now getting your next fabric, right? Fold it over, ready to go. So this is a really cool way. Now notice this little pink kind of ribbon we tied on here. It doesn't come with that. We added that. Why? Because this is metal. It gets hot, right? So when we pull this out, it's ready to go. And I just go back in with my iron, put my iron on there to just repress it, come back with my clapper, add some weight, and I move on to the next one. However you want to make Prairie Points, whether you're doing that yourself, obviously doable, or you're using the Prairie Pointer, you're going to make a lot of Prairie Points in the red, the holly, the green, and also in that busy. They're all made exactly the same. Once we have that, now comes out our template. So I'm going to make some space and we're going to talk about the template. You're going to want to protect your workspace. And that's what I actually have that sheet for that I use to cover up to press with. That's going to protect my cutting mat because we're going to be needing to use some glue. I historically in the past have always used the Roxanne's Glue Based It. Now we have another product that our team has been using. This is the 505. This is kind of like a super big glue stick. They have really enjoyed using that. It doesn't matter what you use. Whatever that is, go ahead and protect your workspace. Let me go ahead and clean up just a bit so we can get ready. It's going to take up a lot of room on my table. And we'll begin to put the center down as well as place our Prairie Points and start to build our table topper. So I have some parchment paper out to protect my work surface. And I've got the point of view Kaleidoscope interfacing template. This is the part that will be sewn into your project and is consumable. And again, why you're going to want to be sure to grab that refill pack, because I promise you, once you make one of these, you're going to want to do it again and again and again. All right, this is what this template looks like. Don't be even worried at all about all the numbers and the degrees and the rounds. It is so much simpler than it might appear. So you can see we have, of course, this footprint. Let's just show you, right? That's the part we've built. And these lines here are where those Prairie Points are going to start coming in. Remember that tool, which is really what's driving this whole video in the first place, helped you remember, helped you understand where those Prairie Points were going to hit. This is echoing your template, right? So that's starting to make sense. So the first thing that we do is we're going to simply place that inside the footprint. And we begin to now add our Prairie Points. It's that simple. Now you can choose whether you want to use the 505 or you want to use glue. It does not really matter. We've done projects with both, whatever your comfort level is. But we absolutely want to get that down solidly, where it's not going to move, because everything is now built off the center template. Everything. And I feel like that's solid. All right, here's something else that's fun. Remember how all the Prairie Points are built the same. If you wanted to put the holly first and then red, green, and red, go for it. We liked this arrangement, but it doesn't need to be that arrangement. This could be completely swapped around because they're all the same. But I'll go ahead and repeat what we've done. If you're going to be using either the 505 or the Roxanne's glue, you're going to be putting glue really in this footprint. It's very important. It's on the point and on the sides. And the first thing we'll be doing is, you see this line up here? Well, we're going to sit that's a shelf. And I'm going to sit that right there so that that dash line and my opening are right in line. Now we're going to build this on the opposite side. Again, we're going to be adding our glue. And we're going to work on the opposite side. So I'm going to scoot that a little bit more toward me. Where that line, the solid line, is your shelf. That is where the bottom of the prairie point sits, and you're visually imagining that dashed line continuing right up through your prairie point. And notice how your prairie point is pointing right toward where we just sewed that center motif together. Now we'll continue, and I'll just show you what we're going to be doing on north, south, east, and west. As a pilot, this makes me happy. This is a world I understand. Once those are done, you're going to work in the quadrants, right? That's northwest. This is northeast. Over here in our southeast. And over here in our southwest. And again, those are our shelves. So I'm going to go ahead and glue that down and get to this stage. I'll be right back. Now that I have that down, notice here we have this other round. You can see it just a touch on these shelves. Right there, and there, and there, and there. If that bothered you and you want more visibility, you can trim some of this away. It's not going to hurt anything because it's all going to end up being covered up. I feel that it's enough that I can see what I'm doing, right? I feel that that is sufficient, but if you're concerned, you could certainly trim it away. I want to show you something. I'm going to keep laying this out real quick. I want to show you something that I want you to do a double check before you start gluing anything down. Or maybe in combination of when you're gluing it down. Notice in this layer, I don't have these seams to line up with. I'm a little more freestyle. Is that it? Is that it? What is it? What are you going to do about it? Remembering that ideally, we want these to be opposite of each other. Visually pleasing. This is where you could use another ruler, and I've got a 2.5 inch here, that notice I have this line and this line. If I place that ruler from side to side, I am going to adjust that so that the opening of the flap is right there and the opening right there. Now they are truly opposite of each other. Now, before you do anything else, I would recommend, and let's do it this way actually, because we know we need glue. The glue doesn't dry immediately. Let's just put glue on the back of those, both of those. Let's try to get them in position, and then we're going to do a lineup again, a lineup check. We think that's it, right? Let me put this one down. We think that's it, but let's check. Dash line to dash line. Oh, we did do pretty good right there. There's the opening. There's the opening. I'm just going to push it down. Now, if I had to make an adjustment, I would just adjust it. All right, you get the idea. Now, here's the great news. Once you get these ones that are on the 22.5 degrees lined up, every other prairie point that comes after is lining up with this first piece. It's just this first row you want to take a little bit of extra time on. So again, I'll be working in opposites so I can get things nicely lined up and as even as I can. This might work better maybe on the edge there. I have not used this product a lot. I historically use the Roxanne's, but if you do use the Roxanne's, which has a much more precise tip, a little bit less messy to work with, you need to wait for that to dry before you start sewing things together, whereas this appears to be drying a little bit quicker. So again, placing one in this position, one in the opposite position. Let's go ahead and check. I'm going to adjust that just a little bit. Okay, then I'll work on these 2 pairs and these 2 pairs, and then we'll work on our next round coming up right after that. Now that we have our first round down, the rest is so easy peasy, so easy peasy. There's our shelves again, and we're going to work again, north, south, east, west, work in your 45 degrees. Same thing, I'll just demonstrate that. Then I'll go ahead and glue everything down. There's my shelf. And notice I'm lining up with the fold of the Prairie Point that preceded me. These need to line up because when we start sewing this through that's going to be very important that they're in alignment so that we just go straight through and we're plowing right through that whole thing. So round two, you get the idea. Lining up with the Prairie Point before it, working in our quadrants, just like before. And then that's all glued down. Here comes this one, lining up here, right? You're like, I get it, Jen. That is it. That is all there is to doing this. And you continue to do that for the 4 rounds. As I said, if you're going to be using a product like the Roxanne's glue, which is historically what I have used, it works fabulously. On this end of it, it looks really, really nice. This is kind of the double barrel. I think this one, I'll show you what that looks like. It's just too much glue. Go ahead and use this one. It works beautifully. Let me show it to you. Make sure you get some in that point, because that's going to be really key when we are sewing these down. We don't want those to flip up because they weren't glued down. So I'm going to clean that up and start gluing this down in my north, south, east, west, and then my 45-degree quadrants, then my 22.5. Repeating all of that for all of the layers and letting things dry, okay? Then when I come back, it's going to look very different than it does right now. Everything's going to be down. I'm going to have the monopoly, probably the smoke, actually loaded into my machine. Either one works fabulously. Don't get too caught up in that if you can't find the smoke. Clear works great. And we're going to start stitching all of our Prairie Points down. Now, of course, we're going to be needing to stitch them to something, right? So there'll be other things coming into play, but I have a lot of work to do, and so do you, to get everything glued down. And I'll see you once that's done, and we'll move on to our next steps. All my Prairie Points were down. I let them dry as hard as that was because I want to keep going. And don't be afraid to take the project to a pressing mat. Just make sure everything is down. You don't need to be shy about that. All right, our next step is explained in the pattern in detail. I'll show you what we're going to do, and then I'll go to the machine and do it. All right, we're done with our parchment paper. All right, so we know that the glue is down, but remember, it's only temporary. We need to lock this down. I have loaded a couple things onto my sewing machine. I have the monofilament. I have smoke, just happened to pick that one. Clear would do just the same job. I also have an open toe foot now on my machine so that I can see exactly what I'm doing. What we're going to be doing next is shown in our pattern, and I'll just show you that step here. This is such a well-written pattern. I think we went through this and edited this like 5 times to try to give you the best vantage point. We're working on figures 11 and 12 right now, and what we're doing at this point is we're going to be using either the Clover Hold It Precision Stiletto, that's a 5-barrel name, or you could also use another notion from Clover, and this is called the Curved Tailor's Awl. Does not matter what you use, here's what you're trying to get accomplished. Starting at these points and sewing in the gap and in this gap, right? And in this gap, and this one's easy. We can just lift the flaps up. We're trying to bury the thread. We're trying to not let that thread ride up on top of this, because historically, a monopoly clear thread has a little bit of a shine. Our desire is to make it appear completely invisible. And you can see from our sample here, you can see there's a thread in there, but just barely, right? They did a great job of sinking that. This is why we have the tool, is to try to help pull the fabric out of the way so that we can stitch very carefully and slowly down this, picking up the next one. See now why it was so important that these were in line, right? Versus being jogging all over the place. So one of the other things I'm going to suggest to you as a place to start is actually, instead of at that tip, actually start maybe about 1/4 of an inch inside, back up to that location, and then start here. Why? Because number one, when you clip that thread, it might have a little bit of a tail there. And if you go to try to trim it, you might accidentally clip your fabric. Why do I know this? Because I have done this on another sample. And I realized if I started a little bit deeper in there and back up, I'm going to reduce or really eliminate that possibility. Okay, and then we're going to come to the end here, just right off the edge, clip your thread, and you need to do that for each one of these lanes. I would say this is time consuming. You need to go slow, and you need to be deciding on which one of these tools, because you most certainly do not want to be getting your fingers that close to the needle. It's just too dangerous. Choose your favorite tool to be able to move the fabric out of the way. Okay, let me go demonstrate that for you, and you can see the process. Okay, so just like I described, again, it's a little tricky to catch on film here. I'm trying to drop that needle in this valley and not catch the flaps and go backward. So I'm going to hand crank that into that valley, making sure I don't have either side. Lower this, and I'm going to start going backwards. And this is a little bit tricky to get it going. Okay, so we have some success. Now, trying to keep this out of the way as we move forward. Moving things out of the way, we want to hit that point there. Open that up there. Now here's the great news. Once you get to here, I'm going to just lift up that foot for just a second. These can open. This can open right up. You're just going to be diving right to the middle of that. How nice, right? That's our favorite one. And I'm just aiming right toward that dashed line. All right. Now let's look and see how we've done. So of course, our goal was to sink that. Boy, I can barely see this thread. There it is. Our goal was to sink the thread, not rise up on top of the fabric. We did a good job of that. We're going to continue around all of those. Once that's done, these flaps will then be glued down. So you're going to come back with your glue, put just a little bit here and here, and go ahead and close all of that, and we'll do that and let it dry. So again, this is a tedious process, but considering the look is really quite lovely, it is worth the time. So now that everything's been secured as far as stitching in the middle of our folds of our Prairie Point and we've glued the flaps down. Now we're going to check that. We want to make sure that as we look on the back side, there's no flaps opening up. If there is, go ahead and turn that back over, add a little bit of glue and get that down pat before we flip it over. Let's look at the back side of the project here. There's a solid dark black line. Make sure you're sewing 1/8 of an inch on the inside of this line on the side here. This side all the way around. We're going to go ahead and sew that down. And then we're going to cut on that line. And this is really why you need those flaps secured, because you can imagine if one of those came open, you're blind, right? Those Prairie Points are now all on the bottom side. So we'll head over to the sewing machine and we're going to be sewing 1/8 of an inch to the inside of the line. Before we start cutting, go ahead and check. I've done one of these one time where the flap actually lifted and folded back. Thankfully, I had checked that. I seam ripped that, glued it back down, and re-sewed it. This is ready to go. So we flip it back over, and with a nice sharp pair of scissors, you could certainly do this with a rotary cutter if you wish, if you feel like you have a lot of control, is we're now going to cut the project out directly on the solid line. And isn't that beautiful already? I love it. So now it's time to grab our backing fabric. Also from Up on the Housetop. Is this just adorable? Could not resist that one. Of course, we want to give that a nice press. So you'll be grabbing for either Fusible Fleece. It could be batting. Remember that in the very middle, when we did our Kaleidoscope block, we used 2 layers of Fusible Fleece or batting just to give it that really embossed look. For this part, you'll be using a single piece of batting or Fusible Fleece. About a 19 by 19 inch piece works and gives you a little bit of breathing room around the perimeter. So you'll go ahead and place that right side down, of course, because that's going to be on the back side of our project. And then we'll layer our batting or Fusible Fleece. I happen to have some Fusible Fleece here because I just love the contact, right? That's less spray basted or wherever people like to use pins to kind of attach all the layers. I'm just going to give that a quick iron and attach all of that together. And then what I'll actually do, because when we put this on top, you know, this is a single-sided fusible product. What I'll actually do is use a little bit of that 505 glue stick. So even if you really like to glue your Prairie Points down with the Roxanne's Glue Basic, because that's kind of what I've always done as well, the 505 can be a really nice product. This is a product that is available in an aerosol can, but I don't like how it can be very fumey. I feel like I can't use it inside, whereas the stick here does not have the fume. It's a really nice product to have and be using in lieu of that 505 spray. Now, when I'm outside and I have a nice, open way to ventilate, I don't mind using the 505 spray, but in the middle of winter in Idaho, I'm not excited about going outside, right? And I'm usually crafting and sewing in the middle of the night. Even more of a reason I don't want to go out. So today, what I'm going to do, when I go ahead and put my point of view on the top, is instead of pinning or doing some other approach to attach that, I'm going to actually put a bunch of this on the back. So I think these products work really well in combination. Just to get this thing coming together. All right. Something to make it stick. All right. And if you want to iron things together, make sure everything has really nice contact, go for that. The next thing that we're going to be doing at this point is actually two things. As we look at our sample, and remember that thread set's really its mission is now coming into play. Because while we have these lovely prairie points, and they are down to the background, you can imagine that if you were to wash this, you know, these flaps might kind of start to lift, and it's going to have just a lovely finished look if they're stitched down. So let's look at our sample here, and this is what we'll go ahead and do together. You can see here that we've used the red, green, and the burgundy. We actually used the red here. We used the green in both of these, and then this lovely burgundy color in the perimeter. And we could, of course, be doing this to come back and secure our binding later on. But so I've already loaded a red into my machine, and we're just going to be doing a little bit of this top sewing. And of course, it's also helping us to attach all of these layers together, right? So it's not only very stylish looking, it's actually very important to do that at this point, to lock all of this in together. So I've got an open toe foot again so that I can see where I'm traveling. Notice this is a very nice tight stitch. So you're going to pick a spot, and you might want to practice a little bit, because as quilters, we're used to sewing 1/4 of an inch, not that. So if you're not comfortable with that, go ahead and do a little bit of practice. But once you are, go ahead and load the red into the top. We loaded the burgundy into the bobbin, and we used that color on every single round that we did. So from the back side, all of this has the burgundy on the back. So we thought that was really nice versus seeing the green and the red. It looks really nice on the back as well. So we'll head over to the machine now, and we're going to start stitching this here in the detail. So I'm going to start sewing, and I realized I had told you there were really two things what we're doing at this stage. Definitely stitching all these down, but if you want to add additional stitching, this is the time to do it for the middle portion as well. Because remember, we just have the 2 layers, we quilted that. But if you want to come back and stitch around that center gold portion like we did on our sample, you would do that at some stage. And probably when we go ahead and add the green, I'll try to remember to do that because we did that on our sample. I think it looks pretty cool. Okay, I'm going to find a place to start. And I'm going to try to maintain the distance. That's going to be my goal. So let's get started. Now, once you pass this tuck, I'm going to count 1, 2. Whatever you do, try to be consistent about where you pivot. So you can see here, by just being very consistent, sewing slower than normal, we're doing a really lovely job of top quilting these prairie points down, which is now not only looking so professional, but it's securing all of the layers together. So I will continue with my red, my green, and my dark burgundy. I'll also remember to quilt around that center, that beautiful kind of golden brown. And then once that's done, we're going to talk about trimming our project up and adding our binding. Okay, I have everything stitched down. I did remember to go around this beautiful kind of warm golden center. I also added some additional quilting here to just kind of emboss everything. You can see that on the back. And then while I was there at the sewing machine, the next step in our pattern is to actually sew 1/8 of an inch all the way around the perimeter so everything is really locked down there. Now that that's done, oh, and another thing that I did, I noticed this, what this pile is all about, is as I was trying to work around and sew everything, there was a lot of extra fabric around the perimeter that was really kind of bumping into the machine. I just trimmed it away. I cut my thread, trimmed it away, and continued on. So that's why this looks like this. But now we will either use our rotary cutter or a pair of scissors to just cut right along that edge. Now, I will keep cutting all the way around, and our final step in this process is actually to create the binding. And we've included the instructions inside the pattern, and you might already have your favorite technique, but in case you don't, I'll continue on with the binding. But if you're like, I'm a binding pro, I don't need that, then by all means, this is really the final step, is to put on that binding. But assuming that maybe you're like, you know what, I've never bound anything that's round. It is a little bit of the same process, and I think a lot of times easier, because as we know with a quilt, you have to miter those corners, right? So it has a nice 90-degree corner. But here, this is actually very simple. So we have prepared our binding, and let me just show you how we set this up. And we've talked about this actually inside your pattern here. This is on the final page here of our pattern here. So as we have our binding strips, and we sew 2 of them together, it takes 2 strips, and you don't need to do a bias binding. The turn is not so tight that you have to do that. Although if you want to do bias binding, we do have instructions inside the pattern to help you do that. I just cut with the fabric strips, and we have 2 strips sewn together. We join them on the 45, so we have that there. Now you can see here that we have our open strip here. The first thing we just recommend doing is just giving that a cut. This is not really on the 45, but I'm just going to kind of wing it at this point to give that just a nice cut. Okay. And we can fold this over, and it doesn't need to be exactly 1/4 of an inch. We just want to fold that over so there's a nice edge there and it's not a raw edge. Okay, and I'm just going to trim that off the back. So I'll explain what we're going to do here, and then I'll actually demonstrate it for you. So the binding, as in a regular quilt, will be attached to the front of the project. And what we like to do, and Wonder Clips are our friends, so we're going to bring those out. I love how they work for us, so much better than pins. First off, patchwork pins are our friend. They're so delicate, and we use them. Remember, we used them when we put together our center. We really wanted to nail everything just precisely. Patchwork pins, the extra fine patchwork pins, do that. But this is not the time to use that, because as you can imagine, going through this much bulk will definitely bend and ruin those pins. So this is when we transition to the Wonder Clips. So I'm just going to begin by clipping this in place, just kind of getting this started. And the first thing that we're going to do is we're going to stitch this down with the flap open, and stitch this down about a good 6 inches. And then we're going to stop, cut our thread, fold it back over, and we're going to continue sewing around. Resist the temptation of really kind of tugging at that. We want to do something called easing in, and I'll talk about that as we're sewing, because I have had quilts where I just was kind of like really reefing this around. The problem is when the fabric relaxes, the project kind of does a little bit of almost a taco. So as we sew, I'm kind of easing things in, giving it I'm not stretching the fabric. That's what I'm trying to state here. Probably not doing a great job of stating it. But let's go ahead and get started. We're going to definitely stitch this down, back stitch a couple times. Again, go forward about 6 inches with a 1/4 inch seam allowance, stop, cut our thread, turn our binding strip over, continue on all the way around, and then I'll show you how to clip it, and we'll go ahead and secure our binding by machine, and we'll be done with our project. So I'm back to a regular foot on my machine. I certainly could have kept the other one, but I'm more comfortable understanding where the 1/4 inch is with this foot. And so again, we'll just go ahead and start. I'm going to move my wonder clips so I don't dump them. And the wonder clips will actually come more into play when we clip the binding to the back. So let's get started. All right, let's cut our thread. And you can see I've allowed plenty of breathing room. I'm not pulling on the fabric. And now we will close that. Looks like I left off about right there. We'll start sewing right there. And we'll just attach our binding to the front of the project. So we're approaching now where this will tuck in. So I'm going to project probably about there. I'm going to go ahead and cut this. And you can certainly put the rest of that binding strip in your stash for another day. So I'll continue to come around, being aware that I need to now open this up, lay that in, all right? So the goal is to now tuck that in so it's flush. Just like that. Sometimes easier to do off of the machine. So we have a little bit, we're not so attached. In fact, I'll go ahead and do that so I can come to the table and you can see that a little bit better. So we're at the point now where we really want to lay in this portion under here, right? If that tail is too long, creating problems, trim it. You really don't need anything more than about 1 inch, 1.5 inches max. So even if that's too long, let's trim it. So we want to lay this in, lay this over the top. If you want to have a wonder clip holding things in place, go ahead. This is a great time to start using the clips. And let's go ahead and secure that. I definitely want you to see this part. So there's no mysteries how this goes together. Okay, so our binding is now down to the front. This is where you're going to use a lot of wonder clips. There's 2 sizes of wonder clips. There's actually more than 2. We use the mini and the regular. Definitely be picking up a box of the regular. I don't do binding any other way anymore. I've poked myself far too many times. These are great for clipping different fabrics together. Maybe you're cutting a complex project. You're trying to keep certain sets together. These have a lot of function. Now, some people really like to press their binding away from and toward the back where it's going to be traveling to get a nice clean edge, or they just turn it. If that's you and you want to press it, go for it. If you just want to turn it around to the back, go for that. Now, around the back we go, all the way. You can either use the red thread and a whip stitch and secure that to the back. Or if you're like, nope, this thing's going to have a lot of traffic, it's going to be washed a lot, I'm going to do this whole thing by machine. Great. And we did ours as well. This is where the Wonder Clips come into play, and we definitely stitch our project in the ditch from the front. For that reason, when you use your Wonder Clips, and the Wonder Clips have a profile, this kind of curved part is, the pretty side is going to be up with you because the flat side is going to be traveling along the table of your sewing machine. I've tried using these upside down, and what a mess that was. It was just clunking all around, and it was lopsided and awkward. So just make sure the pretty side's up, clip all the way around as needed. And I always want to make sure that I'm giving a good push to the back so that I do not miss my binding from the front. Because of course it's blind to us from this side. We're wanting to make sure we're catching that, and I can feel that in the back. As I push it to the back, my fingers are definitely letting me know it's back there. So we'll clip all the way around. And this is where I would have, really, because the ditch here is the darker color here. This is both in the top and in the bobbin. I would leave that like that. So let's head over to the machine. We can't quit now. We have to finish this. Let's bring our box of Wonder Clips. So as we're taking them out, we can just be putting them in the box. And you're just going to be stitching through all the layers. Oh my goodness, we made it. We have spent a good part of the day together, but look what we have to show for that. And I love that there's a lot of fabric left over from this particular kit to do even more projects. Let's take a look at what we've accomplished today. How fun is that? I know this has been a longer video. I know, though, there could be steps that could be confusing if you're not seeing someone demonstrate that. So thank you so much for giving me a good part of your day to step you through this process. You can see this is a really fun project to make. So head over to the website. We have a limited amount of these kits, but if you just want to be able to pick up the pattern, the refill packs, and of course that very important template and any other notions you might need, and do it with your own fabrics, we would love to see what you're doing. Definitely let us see that on our Facebook page. We get to see what our customers are doing, and subscribe. Let your friends know this is the place for exciting projects with so much more to come. Thank you again. God bless you, and I'll see you soon on another video.